Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, hi, I'm Shannon and I'm a professional coloured pencil artist, and in this video I'm going to teach you the basics of coloured pencils by sharing a real-time step-by-step tutorial with you where we'll be drawing these autumnal items that I found in the garden. So we're really taking it back to basics in this tutorial. It is suitable for absolutely anybody, whether you've got experience in coloured pencils or whether you're a complete beginner. And you don't need to have the same supplies as me. You can use any coloured pencils that you've got. All you need is some paper or a sketchbook. I personally want to start doing more little studies in a sketchbook. This is just a standard cartridge book, 150 GSM from Artcore, so nothing fancy. This series of tutorials is going to be all about just using what you have and getting stuck in. So if you're really struggling to get started, or maybe you're in a little bit of a rut with your art, this might just be the perfect tutorial for you. These studies are designed to be quick and short, so they won't take you too much time. It's something that you can get stuck into after work, in the evenings, at the weekends, and you can even just do one a night if that works better for you and your schedule. So yeah, there's really no excuse not to get stuck in and have a play around with coloured pencils. So without further ado, let's get into this tutorial. Okie dokie, so grab your sketchbook. We're going to start out with the mushroom. Now this is a great place to start because it's a really basic, simple shape. It's pretty much just rounded with a little bit of extra something going on. And there's lots of texture, there's not that many colours in there, so it's quite forgiving to start with. We don't need to get it perfectly blended and smooth. We can get stuck straight in and not worry too much. So grab yourself a pencil. I'm just using a really basic standard pencil. This is a 2B, but I'd recommend anywhere between like HB and 2B. You don't want to go too dark with your sketch. You want to keep it light and simple, and then we can go back in with the coloured pencils without seeing any outline underneath. So, looking at this mushroom, it's a very, very simple shape. It's pretty rounded, and we're going to reduce all of these subjects down to basic shapes initially before we even think about adding any details, and that is the trick with sketching. You're getting your basic shape and your proportions in before you go in and add any details. So, looking at this mushroom, it's pretty much an oblong, rounded shape like this. And I'm not being too precious with my shape. It's quite messy and sketchy. And it's probably not the perfect shape either. That's the great thing, it's forgiving. If you get it slightly off, it's not the end of the world because it'll still look like a mushroom. And that's the beauty of drawing objects from nature. They all look slightly different and unique. So I'd say that's about right. And then we've got this little bit here, which I'm just going to add a bit of a line in there just to indicate where that's going to be. Do you see how imperfect that is? That is a great starting point, and it looks pretty decent proportion-wise. I'm happy with that. I don't want to spend too long on this, which is why we're doing really small, quick little studies. So I'm now going to take my putty eraser. This is the Faber-Castell one. It's my favourite. It's great for erasing outlines without getting those little flaky bits that you get with a normal eraser. So just slightly lifting that off so I can just about see the outline, but we're going to neaten it up now. So once you get your basic shapes in, then it's time to add a little bit more refinement and tighten up that sketch. So again, with my sharp pencil, just gonna add a little bit more of a clean shape. Still not pressing on hard, I'm still being nice and light. The lighter you are, the easier it is to erase anything. And you're looking for all these little bits of texture. It's not perfectly straight, clean lines. They're very much natural and textured, so keep that in mind. I'm gonna go up here There we go. And then if you want, you can add a little bit of extra detail in. Whatever you add in, we are going to be redrawing it back in with the coloured pencils. So the more you add now, it does make it a little bit easier to see where things are, but it also means you're going to have to go back over it with the coloured pencils. So it's totally up to you how detailed you want to make this, but I want this to be a pretty quick study, so I'm not going to go too crazy. I think I will leave that there. So I'm going to be using the Faber-Castell Polychromos, and some of these are really short, which is why I've got them in pencil extenders. So if you're wondering what these metal things are attached to my pencils, it's because I've just used these a lot. So they're teeny tiny and it just helps me to have more control over what I'm doing. And you want to make sure that your pencils are really sharp for this to get as much detail as possible into this teeny tiny little study. So I'm using a basic metal sharpener, nothing crazy. I used to always use a more expensive handheld sharpener, but for teeny pencils like this, they don't fit in it, so I've still got to use just a basic metal sharpener. I'll link everything that I'm using down below. So the first colour that I'm using is a sort of a medium brown. It's not really warm, it's not really cool, it's just a mid-brown, nothing crazy. This is Nougat 178, but whatever coloured pencils you have, just find yourself a medium brown colour. If it's a little bit warm, it doesn't matter. It'd actually be interesting to see how drawings of different coloured pencils turn out. So, as I said earlier, we're going to be redrawing this back in with coloured pencils. So again, I'm going to slightly dab off the initial sketch, because we do not want graphite lines showing through the drawing because it just looks messy. Sort of ruins the effect of the realism because you can see a grey sketch through it. It's not very appealing. So just lift that off enough that you can just about see it, but it's not going to interfere with your coloured pencil drawing. And we're basically going to draw this back in with the brown colour. And what this means is we'll now have a solid sketch of the mushroom without any of the graphite, and this won't budge then. The coloured pencil won't just smudge and lift off. It'll stay in place and it'll act as a really nice, clean, clear guideline for us. So I'm not pressing too hard with this, I'm being really soft and gentle because, like I said, coloured pencil doesn't really budge. So if you make a mistake, it's not the easiest thing in the world to fix. So be careful, take your time, and don't worry about rushing too much. Using my pencil quite high up on the casing, and then I've got a really light and loose grip on it. It's not too tight, it gives me room to make more sweeping organic movements rather than being super close and, you know, fussing over every intricate little detail. This helps us to take a step back a little bit and be a bit looser. So just bringing that down there. Don't worry if your shape isn't perfect, mine's definitely not perfect. And I'm going to add some of these little bits of texture in. They're probably not going to look exactly like the reference, but that's okay. Trying not to fuss too much over it. A lot of my drawings I do a lot of fussing over, especially if I'm drawing animals, because it's much more important to get those right. But for something like this, it isn't the end of the world, so let's make the most of it and not worry too much about every little detail. And it also encourages you to learn how to use a bit of artistic license and get better at drawing without always worrying exactly what it looks like. So, I think that is about enough there to get started. Might make that a little bit bigger, just spend a couple of minutes adding any last bits that you want to add. And once again, I'm just going to use my putty eraser to get rid of any little extra guidelines that might be showing through, because we do not want any of those now. We're moving on from the initial sketch. it's all about the coloured pencils now. So with coloured pencils, it's all about building layers, starting from lighter colours and gradually working our way up to darker colours. That's the technique that I use most of the time, and it just means that we can gradually add more and more and minimise the number of mistakes we're going to make. Also, if we start light and gradually work to darker colours, it means that we can keep adding more and more. Some artists like to work a little bit differently and work darker and then burnish on top with a lighter colour, but I find that kind of locks the layers in and you can't really add that much more on top. Makes it a little bit shiny and difficult to add more and more layers, which is what we need for coloured pencils. So that's a little bit more of a complex technique, whereas this is great for beginners because it means you can keep using trial and error and experimenting with different tones and colours, see what works and build it up slowly. So, looking at this mushroom, I want to pick out what the lightest colour is that I can see. And there's definitely a bit of a creamy yellow tone, especially if you look at the stalk here. It's very creamy pale yellow. So, that's exactly what I'm going to use, a creamy pale yellow colour. And I'm going to go with Ivory, but just use whatever pale yellow you've got, the palest yellow in your kit. And I'm going to take this over the whole mushroom. I'm not pressing on too hard, but I'm also not being too light. I want to get a nice creamy, smooth layer. It's the foundation that the rest of our colours are going to go on top of, and it just takes that white of the paper away. I don't like working on stark white paper. You want a bit of something down to begin with. It just means that adding those extra layers on top, it's gonna start coming together a little bit more easily. You always want a bit of something to tone the paper. And choosing an undertone can be a little bit more complicated in some subjects where there's various different tones and colours, like tabby cats for example. I'm just doing a tabby cat tutorial on my Patreon and that has quite a lot of different colours in the fur, but for something like this, it keeps it nice and simple for us. Because it's pretty much all one undertone. So that's looking pretty good and it's a great place to start adding some extra colours. And looking at this, it needs a little bit more of a yellow tone, if you ask me. A bit of an ochre colour. So have a look in your pencil kit and see if you've got anything like this. This is Dark Naples Ochre 184 from the Polychromos, but any ochre yellow colour will do for this. We're not being fussy. I have various different ochre colours that I could use for this, but I just reached for this one because it's the first one that I found. So not being too fussy. We're trying to get away from being overly conscious about the colours we're choosing and stop overthinking it. So I'm going to use this and just start blending it in, adding another layer, sort of shading on top of that initial base colour. We're not worried about adding texture yet. It's just about toning the paper so that we've got the right colours, because with coloured pencils you can't mix the colours like you can paint on a palette, so you sort of have to use your paper as a palette and mix all of your colours together that way instead. So just blending this in. You can take your time, you can be quick with it. I'm gonna sort of speed up a little bit because I don't want to take too long. Blend that in. And I'm pretty much going over this whole top bit. I feel like that could do with being a bit lighter, so focusing it more on the main body of the mushroom. And I'm making sure I've blended it quite well. I don't particularly like my drawings to be really rough. I do like a bit of refinement. As a realism artist, it's just something that I gravitate towards. But if you have a bit more of a sketchy style naturally, then go for more of a sketchy style. There's no rules. Art is totally subjective to what you like and your natural drawing style, because everyone has their own unique way of doing things. And everyone sort of has their own level of pressure that they apply to the drawings. I'm quite heavy-handed naturally, but over the years I've trained myself to be a bit lighter-handed, so sort of somewhere in between now. And I might just add a little bit into that bottom part, but I think that's enough, to be honest. Okie dokie, let's go back to our brown colour, our Nougat, and we're going to start to add a little bit of texture and detail into this mushroom. So again, I'm not being too precious, but I just want to add a little bit of something. So I'm looking for all of these little shapes and details that I can see. And I'm just starting to add some little squiggles and lines and marks and darker bits. I'm going to do a little bit of light shading there just to build up a little bit more shape in the stalk of the mushroom. And you're looking for the darker areas as well. So some bits are lighter than others, some bits are darker than others. And it's these subtle differences that's going to help to make this look more realistic. So I'm just doing some little like scribbles, some bits of shading. I'm going to change the direction that my pencil's going in to keep it interesting. I'm going to do some little bits that go this way, and then you could do some bits that go that way. It's just mixing it up, having a look at the reference and seeing where things are going, sort of the direction of the shadows and bits of texture that you can see. So just gradually build it up. Don't worry too much. It's very forgiving. It's a great place to start doing bits of flora from nature, because they're never perfect. They're all unique in their own way. And it's much, much simpler than drawing animals, but it's a great starting point if you do want to draw animals, because it's a lot of the same organic shapes and colours, but you don't have the pressure of trying to make it look lifelike and have character. Not in the same way anyway. So, still doing various different marks and bits of shading, changing the direction of my pencil. Build these up, and as you get to this bit you can leave some gaps with some of those lighter colours showing through to make it look a bit more textured. Not being too fussy of my placement, I'm sort of taking inspiration from the reference but without fussing over every single little detail. Because, I don't know about you, but I haven't got all day to do that. Not for a little study like this. We're trying to achieve a likeness, not a carbon copy. So just working this down here. I'm going to try and make some of these a little bit more obvious, some clearer shapes, but again, I'm not too fussed. And we can also darken it up a little bit with a darker brown shortly, once we've finished our first layer of detail. So it's starting to look a little bit more rounded, especially because I've started from the outside edges and I'm working my way in. And as much as we're trying to be quick with this, coloured pencils still take quite a bit of time. You're just never going to get away from the fact that it's a time-consuming medium. So If that's something you struggle with, maybe paints would be more suitable for you because you can be a little bit quicker and get it done in a lot less time. But if you quite enjoy the time and the process that it takes to do a coloured pencil drawing, then it might just be the thing you need to unwind a little bit and switch off, because you can get so lost in adding all of these little details, and it's a really relaxing process, which is why I've stuck with it for so many years. I've been drawing in coloured pencils now for over a decade, pretty much my whole life, so obviously it's something that I quite enjoy, spending time building up the layers. If you need to, you can start to add another layer, make it a little bit darker in places if you feel like it just needs a little bit of extra depth, but we are going to be adding a darker colour very soon. So just spend another minute perfecting, adding any last bits. Okay, let's now move on to a darker colour, and I'm going to use the Burnt Umber 280. It's a darker brown, so just use whatever darker brown you've got. And we're now going to use this to start adding some extra detail. So we're just going back over everything that we've already done, looking for the darker bits, and just adding another layer of detail and texture. And it's gradually adding these layers that's going to help to make this look more realistic. You want it to have really obvious values where some bits are lighter, some bits are darker, and that's what's going to bring it to life. So you can be a little bit more intricate with this if you want to, because obviously it's standing out a little bit more on the mushroom. So just building that up, make that a little bit darker there. But again, I'm not being overly fussy. Let's have a look here. This bit could do with being a bit darker, I think. And I'm just going to speed this up a little bit because I could spend all day adding all these little details, but this is a quick study, so I don't want it to take me too long. I'm going to start just doing some little bits of texture, some little scribbles, just to start getting these smaller bits around here. And again here, just gradually making these smaller and smaller as we get more central. I'm going to make that line a little bit darker. Add a little bit more texture through this centre. And it's almost like we're cross shading here. So like I said, doing some in one direction and then in a different direction. So we're always slightly alternating where the pencil's moving. And it just helps us to get this really nice, organic, natural looking texture. There we go. And I'm going to leave that there. Let's just add a tiny bit more here actually. Can always add a bit more later if we want to. That's the beauty of coloured pencils. If you build it up lightly, and gradually you can add more and more. If you build it up too heavily too quickly, it gets a little bit trickier. So I am now going to use some dark Sepia 175, which is a really dark grey-brown colour. So it's not quite black, sort of like just above black. And it's going to be perfect for adding these really dark bits, shadows, and making this look even more realistic. So we're basically going back over everything again. Coloured pencils involves a lot of re-going over things. So again, you do need to have patience and trust the process and keep going. I think it can be easy to give up and just want to leave it there, but it's going to look so much more realistic with multiple layers. So just going back in, again, I'm focusing on the darkest bits. So here, starting to add a little bit more texture. And my pencil's sharp again. I want to make sure it's sharp to get all of these little details in there. And just blending those in. But there's not quite as much of this in the reference. It's a little bit lighter as you get round here. So I'm just going to focus it on the edge and just bring it in a little bit. Always looking at that reference to see where the light and dark areas are and trying your best to recreate them. So it's a lot darker on this left hand side. So we should definitely focus a little bit more of this round here. Start blending it in here. And I'm not going to add the shadow underneath the mushroom. I'm just going to keep it as the mushroom itself. Because all of these have been taken at slightly different angles, so the shadows will be in different places, and I just want to keep this super simple, not worry too much about any extra details. So start blending a little bit on here. Building it all up. And you might feel like you need a bit of extra mid-brown and the darker brown. That's the thing with coloured pencils. You always end up needing to add an extra few layers of some of the other colours you've already used. But it's so much better to do it that way and to build it up gradually than it is to wish you hadn't added so much. Something that you want to get into the habit of, just being really light and careful. Doing it bit by bit. I feel like I'm a broken record in my tutorials because I'm always saying these same things, but honestly, it's so important. It's like the fundamentals of drawing in coloured pencils. So just going to add a little bit more around here. Some little bits on here. Some little tiny bits. Don't want to go too long with this colour. I feel like it's looking pretty good. I just add a few more little bits of texture and stuff in here. Okay, and I am going to go back to a bit of burnt umber 280, I think, so my darker brown. And I'm just going to blend this in. Anywhere that it's looking a little bit too light, I might fill in some little gaps around here. Add a little bit more colour. Still not pressing on super hard, I'm just blending it in a little bit more. And I'm trying to just give it a little bit more roundness. And by blending it in a bit darker from the edges and leaving the centre of it lighter, that is how you create roundness. Add a little bit more there. And a little tiny bit more through the middle. And if you want, you can add a bit more of your ochre colour. Adding my dark Naples Ochre 184, I might just blend a little bit more of that in. Get a little bit more vibrance. Just be careful when you're blending light colours on top of dark though, because they can smudge things a little bit. It was not too bad in this case, but sometimes you've just got to be careful if you do that. Might add a tiny little bit in there just for a bit of extra colour. And if you want, you can add a bit of your lighter brown again. My Nougat 178. I might just add a bit more of that into that area there. Just add a bit more shape. And if you need to, you can add a bit more through here, but it's pretty dark now, so it won't really make much of a difference. Okay, that looks pretty good. I think it just needs that next level of depth to finish it off. So we are going to use a bit of black. We're using the black 199 from Faber-Castell, another one in a pencil extender, but it's a well-used pencil. I know a lot of artists don't like to use black, but when it's mixed in with other colours and it's not just used on its own on white paper, it works really well at darkening up a drawing or a painting. I think when people say they don't like using black, it's using black on its own. When mixed with other things, when combined with different colours, it's great. So I'm going to use this to just add that last little bit of depth into the mushroom, focusing mostly on this top area where it's super dark. Blending it in, and I am quite careful with black. I don't like adding too much. I don't like my drawings to be super dark. I do like to have a bit of lightness in there. So I use it sparingly when it's necessary. I don't add black for the sake of it. But if you're looking at this reference, it's so dark on that back area, and I don't think any other colour would cut it. It needs a little bit of black. I'm going to add a little bit in here as well. Bit around here. Just be careful and add little bits and bobs. Keep looking back and seeing what it looks like as a whole. You might feel like you need a little bit more brown again, and that's absolutely fine. You can just keep adding. It's totally subjective at this stage. as to whether you need a bit more brown or a bit more ochre or whatever you think it needs. I feel like I need a bit more black around here. And once you get to this point as well, you can start to add a little bit more pressure to get a little bit more pigment and colour payoff, because you can afford to. You've built up most of the layers and you know that you don't need to add too much more. So it's okay to add a little bit more pressure. I'm going to add some more burnt umber to 80, my dark brown colour. And like I say, I'm going to add a bit more pressure now because I know that I can. Still not like trying to damage the paper or anything. We're not trying to add too much pressure, but we can afford to add a little bit more and create that extra depth. Because while I encourage you to use a lighter hand as you're building it, you don't want your drawing to look really wispy and pale and barely there. You do want to have a little bit of oomph to it for it to look realistic. But again, it's totally personal preference, whether you prefer a paler drawing or a more saturated drawing with bright colours. It's totally up to you. Starting it up a little bit, I might just add a bit more around here. And it can be tempted to just go on forever and ever and ever, but I am going to call it finished very, very soon because I've got some more studies to do in this video. And I think it looks pretty good. Might add a tiny bit more dark sepia, my dark brown grey colour. And it might be a nice idea if you want to get these done really quick to put a timer on and only allow yourself 20 minutes to do a little study. And it's a great way of testing your ability to get things done quick and to stop when you need to. Otherwise you can just go on forever and then you end up not doing that much practice because you've spent all of your spare time this week on one teeny tiny little drawing. So when you're in the early stages and you're practicing, the more different types of things you can draw, the better really. So that's why I would encourage you not to spend too long on each little study. And then you can move on to the next thing and learn something different from each subject. Okie dokie. Last few little bits and then I am going to call this finished. I'm just going to add the tiniest bit of my dark Naples Ochre 184, my ochre colour, just a really, really light wash through that stalk, just to give it a bit more of a yellow tone. Might just tidy this up a tiny bit more with my dark sepia, my dark brown grey colour. I can see it's not quite tidy on that edge. And then I am going to call that finished because I would quite like to move on to the next study. Feel free to stick around and do the next one with me, or you can dip in and out of this video. It's totally up to you. Feel free to come back and join me on another day if that's all you've got time for today. But if not, let's get stuck straight in. Okie dokie, so the next study we're going to work on is this little acorn reference that I took. There's two different ones. One's got a stalk and the top on and the other one doesn't. So this is going to test some slightly different techniques because again, we're going to be adding texture, but we're also going to be trying to make this smooth and shiny. So two slightly different ways of drawing, but that's absolutely fine. We're going to start out with our standard pencil again, and we're going to look for the shapes in this reference. So obviously the first thing that I see here is how round and again slightly oblong these little acorns are. So I'm going to start with that left acorn, and again I'm not going to draw these that big, just going to map in the basic shape of the acorn, and then let's add where the top bit is. That's about 2/3, maybe a bit more of the way up, maybe it's like a quarter way in. So just mapping in where that is. I'm going to do a little bit of a line to show where the stalk is. And then there's that little bit there, nice little extra bit just to add in. And then we've got the other acorn here, and I'm going to do that about there. Again, a bit of an oblong shape. Probably done that on slightly more of an angle than it is on the reference, but that's fine. I'm making it my own. I don't mind too much. So again, I'm going to give this a slight dab with the putty eraser so that we can just see those initial sketch lines, and we're going to refine it a little bit. So looking at this, I want to add the shape of the smooth area at the bottom. Then there's that little bit just coming out at the bottom there. And then we've got this little bit of texture where the stalk begins. And then I'm just going to map in the shape of that top part, the little hat on the top of the acorn. I'm assuming these are acorns. Found them from the garden. Again, all of these references are little things that I've found in the garden during autumn time. So let's just add this little bit in here. So the idea is that you're never worrying about the details until it comes to doing the more precise sketch. Just means that you can get things in the right place at the right proportions without worrying about all the little details and wasting your time adding all these, and then half of your drawing ends up off the edge of your page or something. Just makes it a little bit easier, because one thing that we do not have time for in this busy day and age is wasting time. So let's do this bit here. Like I said, I've done mine at a little bit more of an angle, but that's fine. And then this one, you can see sort of the flat bit at the bottom of the acorn there. Looks a little bit like an olive. So I'm just going to map that in like that. I'm going to add that little bit at the top, and I think that is good to go. I feel like that one's a little bit smaller than the other one, but that's fine. Again, nothing is ever the same in nature. Things are slightly different and there's variations in the size of things, so it's all good. So let's also dab that outline away again. It's a lot of drawing things in and dabbing it away, so you do end up actually drawing the outlines 3 times, because we've got the initial sketch, the more precise sketch, and then we've got the coloured pencil outline that goes on top of that. So that's 3 chances to correct things if you make any mistakes. So it just means that it gives us a little bit of leeway and we can get it right before we lock everything in place with the coloured pencils. So I can just about see my outlines there, and we're going to stick with some of the same colours. So I'm going to use the Nougat, my medium brown colour, Nougat 178, and we're going to do the exact same thing again. I'm going to use this to outline our acorns, and this is a great colour because it's not too dark and it means that we can correct anything if need be. And again, there's a lot of browns in this acorn, so it makes sense to use a brown colour to do the little outline. So just spend a bit of time making sure you get this pretty accurate. Again, it's never going to be perfectly accurate, but as long as it's similar to the reference, then it's all good. Add my little bit here. I might actually just elongate that a little bit more. And if yours doesn't quite look right, if you've done this bit too thick or too short or too long, don't worry, because it does take a lot of practice to get better at drawing proportions. I tend to use the tracing paper method when I'm drawing animals, just because you want those proportions to be spot on for drawing animals. But for something like this, where we're testing our freehand abilities, it's good to just challenge yourself and try drawing from scratch. I think the more you practice doing that, the better you get at any sort of drawing. You get better at coloured pencils, you get better at adding all of the different bits of texture and blending it all in. So it's a great place to start, just doing basic shapes and sketches like this. Because if you can't sketch, you're going to struggle to do coloured pencils, even with a line drawing that you trace. Because a lot of people say line drawings using tracing paper are cheating, projectors are cheating, and all that sort of stuff. And in a way, I guess if you can't draw without it, you could say it's cheating, but if you are able to draw it, it just is a way of saving time, then it's not cheating at all. And if you're practicing and you need to do that anyway, just to get your proportions right, then do whatever you need to do. There should be no rules in art, if you ask me. It's totally what you make of it. But I do believe that it's good to practice sketching from scratch and figuring out the proportions without using any additional tools. So we've got our initial outlines now. I might just give them a little bit of a tidy up again with the putty eraser. So looking at the lightest colour that I can see in these acorns, it's definitely got a lot of brown in there, but I can see a bit of an orange undertone, a bit of a green undertone as well. So I think I'm going to start out by adding an orange colour, and this is Burnt Ochre 187. Just like a standard orange, not too dark, not too vibrant, sort of like in the middle. And I'm going to use this as a base colour, but I'm going to leave those areas where there's little highlights, I'm going to leave those lighter. So I just blend around those a little bit. Try your best to get them in the right place. If you don't quite get them perfect, then it doesn't matter too much. But yeah, I'm just going to blend that in really lightly. Bring it around here, and I'm just focusing that into the smooth part of the acorn, so I'm not going up here. Just bring it down there a bit, and then do the same with this one. I'm going to leave a little bit of a highlight there, and while we can use white pencils and other tools like that to add highlights back in, you'll never get the highlight quite as light as the paper, unless you use a gel pen or a paint or something like that. But we're keeping it simple here. We're using our coloured pencils and not adding any extra tools for now. We'll probably use a white at some point in this sketch, but I'm just showing you how you can leave the highlights white, show that paper coming through, and use your coloured pencils to blend around them. So, really lightly, just going to blend around that. Perfect. And let's add our green in there. This is just again, a medium green colour. Has like a nice natural grassy colour to it. It's May Green 170. and I'm just going to blend this into the little hat on the top of the acorn as a bit of a base colour. I can definitely see some green in there. Just filling in all those little white grainy gaps, being nice and soft and light with my pencil. Let's add a little bit in this bit here, and then I am going to blend it up the stalk a little bit, although it looks a little bit more orange up there, so probably blend a little bit of that as well. And if you have a look at the reference, there's a bit of a green colour on the bottom of the acorn here. So I'm going to blend that up a little bit, add that slightly different tone, and just very lightly blend that into the orange so that it's seamless. Same here, I can see a little bit of a green colour in there. A little bit there. Might just add a tiny bit more through there, but I think I will leave that there for now. Let's go back to our medium brown colour, our Nougat 178, and I want to start now adding a little bit more detail and definition in this acorn. So using a really sharp pencil again, I'm going to go around some of the edges a little bit, just tighten those up, clean them up, and then let's just go over the top here. Let's start blending this in and creating a little bit more shape, definition and detail in this acorn. So I'm going to do really small movements, and then I'm not going over the highlight by accident. Just take your time with this, because this is the main bulk of the shape of our acorn now. I'm just shading that in, doing sweeping strokes downwards. I'm not really lifting my pencil off though, I'm just leaving the pencil on the paper. And let's just blend around those highlights a little bit. I might go over it a tad. Probably will just use a little bit of white pencil at the end. Might be a little bit too light as it is now. Blend a little bit around here. Still being really light with my hand. I'm not being heavy-handed just yet. And you might find you need to add some more orange and green back in, but that's something that we can easily add in afterwards. Blend a little bit in here. Okay, and then this bit is a little bit more textured. So like we did with the mushroom, I'm going to do some like little squiggles and marks to try and build up a bit more texture. Keep looking at the reference and seeing where the darker parts are, and just building up so the pattern in the top of the acorn there. Just leaving some little gaps for some lighter bits to show through, and then doing some little mark making to build that up. There we go. Might just add a little bit more around here. And then I'm going to add a little bit more detail into this little bit here. Then let's do this bit. Go around the top. I've definitely done mine a little bit thick, but that's fine. Let's blend a little bit of the nougat through there. A little bit of detail to the end. There we go. Then same with this one, I'm just going to add a little bit more of a clean line to the edge. Add a bit more here. Add that little bit at the top. Clean it up a bit if you need to. And then I'm going to start to blend some little sweeping motions in to start building up the main shape of the acorn. There is a little bit of texture in this one, so if you want to add a bit of texture in, you can do, but I might just keep it smooth. That's the great thing about art, you can add little bits in, take little bits out, it's totally up to you. It's quite good to practice your blending technique for drawing smooth, shiny things. So I think I will, for that reason, just leave it smooth without the texture. Add a little bit up here. Just looking for the slightly browner areas of the acorn. I am going to blend a little bit lightly over the highlight just to blend that in a little bit, barely touching the paper, super light. And same there, keep that really light. Okay, and then I'm going to go back to my orange colour, my burnt ochre 187, whatever orange you're using, and I'm just going to add a little bit more of that in there if you feel like you need a bit more of an orange tone. Blend that in a bit, and the more layers that you add, the smoother it starts to become. That's why we need all of those layers in there. Blend that in there. And like I said, I think I need some in the stalk. And I think we need a bit more in this one. That's starting to come together nicely. My highlight is definitely a little bit different to the reference, but that's fine. Doesn't really matter too much. And if you need to add a bit more green back in, you can do, using my May Green 170. So these are looking pretty good. They're still a little bit flat though, if you ask me. I would not want to leave this here. Looks a little bit boring and needs a bit more definition. So let's go back to our dark brown colour that we used in the mushroom, our burnt umber 280 or whatever dark brown that you've got, and we're going to start to add even more depth into these acorns. So going back around the edges, just want to define those a little bit more again. I'm going to add a little bit to the left of that bit at the bottom, whatever you want to call that. I'm going to add a little bit there as well, just at the top of it. Okay, and then I'm going to go underneath the little hat. And I'm going to start to darken up the shiny part of the acorn. Again, using the exact same technique we did with the lighter brown, just sweeping that in. And like I said with the mushroom, you want to focus on the edges and then get a little bit lighter as you get to the centre. That's how you create roundness. A little bit up there, a little bit here. Blend a bit around there. And then let's do a little bit in this top part, just going around that left side. It's definitely darker on the left than it is on the right because the light is coming from this way and it's hitting the acorn on that right hand side. So that left side is much darker. That's where the shadows are. Darken that up. Definitely need to darken this little bit up. And my pencil definitely needs a bit of a sharpen. Keep your pencils as sharp as you can. If you feel like you're not getting the same level of detail as you were doing before, then you probably need to just give it a little sharpen. Sharper the pencils, the more detail you can get. So, just starting that up there. Adding a little bit more in here, but like I said, it's a bit lighter on that right hand side, so I'm not being as dark as I am with this left hand side. And I might just add a little bit more shadow just underneath there. And a little bit more into that stalk. Okay, and then let's do this other one. A little bit more depth at the bottom there. And then going around the edge. Darken this little bit up at the top. And then blend into the rest of that acorn. Make it really shiny and 3D. Focusing on the left hand side definitely more than the right, because again, that's where the shadows are because of where the light's hitting the acorn. So just darkening that up. Blending that all in. There is a little bit of a dark bit there that I'm going to add. Maybe a little bit there, just a bit of texture. Add a little bit more there. Try your best to keep that edge nice and clean. I keep going out of it a little bit accidentally. Just do any last bits of blending. You do have to be a bit more careful when you're blending smooth things like this, which is why we started with the mushroom, because it's a great way of learning how to blend the colours without having to do it perfectly. But with something like this, you do need to be a bit more careful and spend a bit more time putting things in the right place and blending it thoroughly. Okay, let's leave that colour there for now. Let's now use a darker orange. I'm going to use Dark Cadnium Orange 115 because I really like this colour. It's lovely and vibrant. So any darker, more vibrant orange colour will do for this. And can you see where it's a little bit more orange and a bit richer in the bottom of this acorn. Just going to blend that in there. This is a very pigmented colour, so I'm not pressing too hard. We shouldn't do anyway, but especially when the colour's so pigmented. Some of the polychromos are more pigmented than others, and a lot of these cadmium orange colours are super vibrant, so just keep that in mind if you do have these pencils. I'm going to add a little bit into this one as well. You can see there it's got a lot more orange. Blend it in a bit there. It's these hidden extra colours that really bring a drawing to life. Might add a little bit in the stalk. Definitely a bit of an orange colour in there. Might bring a bit more up there. We can always add some more afterwards if need be. I think that looks pretty good. Let's just add a little bit more here. Okay, so these are looking really good. I think they just need a little bit more depth, and we're going to use the same dark brown grey colour that we used in the mushroom, the dark sepia 175 or whatever alternative you've got. And we're going to darken this up now. So once again, going down the side of that acorn there and just starting to blend a little bit more depth and really make this look rounded and realistic now. I'd say it's not as dark on the right hand side. We could do a really light line just to give it a bit more depth, but most of this I want to focus on the left side. And if you look at this acorn, there is a bit of a lighter little line down the left hand edge, so we'll use a bit of white in there afterwards just to lighten that up ever so slightly, but for now just go straight in with this. That's something we can deal with later. I'm going to go over the top of this bit here just to make that stand out a little bit more, and I'm just going to blend underneath it so that it's not too random. I'm going to add a little bit into the bottom here, it's a tiny little bit, and just going to blend a little bit just on that right hand side to add a little bit more of a curved shape. To blend that in, want it to be really well blended, and then I'm going to start to add a little bit of this into the top, blending it into that left side a bit, going over some of these little marks to add a little bit more texture, but again focusing most of it on the left side. Let's add a little bit up here, blend that in, a little bit here. And then the stalk is quite dark in places, so we'll add quite a bit through there as well. Just a few little bits, nothing crazy. A little bit to the end. I don't always like to completely outline everything. It's just if it's the right level of depth and it needs a bit more of a strong line, then I do, but I don't like everything to have a cartoony outline around it. So it's not always relevant to do that. But with something like this, where it's, you know, really crisp and clear, I do like to add that bit of an outline. So I might just clean that up a little bit with my putty eraser. Then I'm going to go back back into this one here, start adding a bit more depth, a bit more of an outline on that left side. Blend that in. A little bit darker there, a little bit more coming from the top just to add that roundness, but really well blended. Okay, I might just be tempted to add a little bit more of my lighter brown, my Nougat 178. I feel like I just need to blend that in a bit more around there. Just to tone that highlight down a little bit. It's not a stark white highlight, so in that case we do add a bit more on top, but sometimes the highlights are really white, so you want to leave that paper whiter, but in this instance we don't really need to. But at least you know now how to do that if you came across something with a really bold white highlight. And then if you've gone a little bit too dark, you can use your putty eraser just to lift out a little bit of pencil. There we go, looks lovely and round. Right, let's now do the same thing that we did with the mushroom, darken it up even more with some black. So I'm using the black 199 from the Polychromos, and like I said earlier, you don't want to add too much black. You want to do it really subtly, just to add that extra little bit of depth. Nothing too crazy. Add a little bit there. Just adds that extra bit of something that makes it look more realistic, gets those values just right. A little bit there, a little bit on here, and a little bit in the stalk in places. Might even be tempted to add a bit more orange or something in that stalk, but I'll do this first. A little bit more in here. A little bit more in here. Blend it in. A little bit more on the top, a little bit more on the bottom here. So it does take a little bit more time, obviously, to do these really smooth blends, and you can't really rush that, so it's probably taken us a little bit longer to do this one for that reason, but that's fine. You can't rush blending, you have to put the time and the work into it. But that looks pretty good. I'm just going to add a little bit more burnt ochre, the orange colour, into that stalk there. That's nice. any extra bits that you need to blend in. I feel like mine's looking pretty well blended, to be honest. Maybe a bit more in there. Okay, and then let's finish off with a little bit of white. I'm just going to use the Polychromos white, although I do use a few different brands sometimes, but for the sake of keeping it super simple and just using what you've got, let's use the white from the same pencil kit. This is white 101, just use whatever white you've got. We're not trying to do too much with this, so all we're going to do is add a little bit of that into the left hand side. You might need to press a little bit harder now, and when you add white it does tend to give it a little bit of a cooler tone, so just keep that in mind if you ever want to add white into your drawings. I don't really do it that much because of that reason. I tend to focus it more on drawings where I do have a cooler undertone anyway, but can you see how that's gone a little bit blue? Which is fine for this because we're only adding it as a little bit of a highlight. But it doesn't always work, especially in animals, so I don't tend to use it too much in animals. But for something like this, it's absolutely fine. I might just blend a little bit over that highlight just to soften that bit there. Looks a little bit grainy in places, and I don't really want it to look grainy. I want to blend that out a little bit. Same on this one. Just blend that out a little bit. Add that bit there that I've missed. And the white from the Polychromos, it's not that pigmented. It's a little bit hard, doesn't do loads, which is why I have other brands like Cavendish Luminance and Derwent Drawing, and I've got a Museum Aquarelle White, which is a watercolour pencil, but it works great for coloured pencil drawings. And yeah, they tend to be better than the Polychromos white, to be honest, but this works for what we need it for right now. I might just be tempted to add a little bit more of the lighter brown, the Nougat. You can go back into it and just tidy it up if you need to, because that has made that highlight a little bit big. So just tidying that up. Tidying that up. You can do these little lines and stuff if you want to. You can see some lines in the highlights. Might do one here. Okay, and I'm going to leave those there. That is the second study in this tutorial finished. Okie dokie, so the third and final subject we're going to draw in this tutorial is this little section of a branch that's been broken off, so you can see a little bit of the inside, and it makes for a really interesting texture when you're drawing. I personally love drawing tree branches and bark. I find it really satisfying. So, same again, we are going to break this down into more basic shapes when we're drawing this with our standard graphite pencil. So I'm focusing on this section where it's like a bit of a V, an upside down V. So let's have a look. Let's just draw a bit of a line that way and a bit of a line that way, just to show where the angles of the branch are. And then I'm going to make it a little bit thicker, add a bit of a line at that side, and then just do a little bit of a point there. And then with this one, so it needs to come from there, and then sort of like that. So we've got two bits. This bit we need to definitely tidy up a little bit more, but that's fine. We've got the initial basic shape of this branch mapped in. So just gonna again use my putty eraser to dab those initial outlines again. So I can just about see it, and now I want to start adding a little bit more detail and texture and get the shape of this just right. So just doing my best to replicate the shapes that I can see in the branch. Don't worry if it's not exactly the same as the reference. Like I always say, these things are quite forgiving. It's not like we're drawing animals at this stage, we're just drawing things from nature that can have a lot of variations in them, so it's not the end of the world. No two branches that you'll draw from this reference would ever look the same anyway, so it's all good. Do a little bit there. Got a bit of a mark in my paper there. It's all good, we'll be drawing over that anyway. And I'm going to add this little bit here. I want it to be really bobbly and textured, so we're adding all these little bobbles in the branch. This bit here. It's got a bit of a knot, or whatever you'd call that bit there, just sticking out. Then I'm just going to finish that there. So let's just add a little bit texture in. I think that looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. I feel like it's enough to get started with for the coloured pencil, so just going to fix that bit a tiny bit. Definitely doesn't look exactly like the reference, but that is all good. Might just bring that out a bit there. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, so once again I am going to erase this a little bit. Just move that down a bit as well. So that I can just see those outlines. And guess what we're going to do next? We're going to use the lighter brown, the Nougat, to start mapping in some of the outlines in this branch. So going back over everything that we've already done is to add a little bit of a coloured pencil outline. And you can be quite rough with this because there's a lot of texture on the edges of this branch. So it's not like it needs to be perfectly smooth or anything like that. There we go, let's just add a little bit more of that detail in here. Like I said, mine definitely isn't exactly like the reference. A little bit of a line in there. And that is enough, I think, to get started. We can start adding a bit of a base colour in there now. So I'm going to go back to the pale yellow colour that we used in the mushroom, and I'm going to use this on this little bit here where it's a bit more yellow toned. It's the Ivory 103 that I'm using. And I'm just focusing that there. So that's a nice pale yellow colour. And then I'd say the rest of this branch is leaning green. So let's use that lighter green colour that we used in the Acorn, the May Green 170, or whatever light green that you've got. And I'm going to take this over the rest of this branch. Really lightly again, don't want to press on too hard. It's got a very mossy look to it, this branch, so the green will help to make it look like it's got loads of moss all over it. Blending it down here. There's all sorts of different tones mixed in there though. So it's going to be quite fun adding all of these different colours. Okay. So let's start to add a little bit more detail back into this branch. Going back to our lighter brown colour, Nougat 178, the one that I'm using. And I'm going to start to build up a little bit more depth and detail. So these bits are a little bit darker, so I'm going to darken those up. Let's add a little bit blended onto that bit there. A little bit of a line. I'm going to blend that in. I think we probably will need a bit of an ochre colour in there afterwards, but we'll get to that. I do tend to think like a few steps ahead of what I'm currently working on. It just helps me to know what direction I'm going to go in, but that's something that comes with experience and practice. You're not going to be able to do that when you're first starting out learning to draw in coloured pencils. But eventually, once you've done lots of different studies like this, you'll sort of get the hang of the same processes that you tend to use for different things that you draw. A lot of them have a lot of the same colours, like all of these have very similar colours, minus a few extra for each one, but it's definitely some colour palettes and processes that overlap for different subjects. So let's have a look here. I'm going to darken this up. Definitely a bit darker on that left side. Most of these pictures that I took were next to a window, and I took them from the same direction. So the window was to the right of me. So obviously the light comes in from the right and then the shadows are on the left side. So just building up some of those shadows, and like we did with the mushroom, I'm just doing little squiggles to build up some texture. Slightly alternating the direction of my pencil a little bit, so that it makes it more interesting. Just going to darken this end bit up. I'm going to go under here. We're just looking for any little shapes or any little darker bits, and it's very forgiving, so don't worry if you put too much in one place or if the shape isn't quite the same. It's all good. It can be pretty scribbly and imperfect when drawing branches, and it'll still look like a branch. So just going to blend a little bit in here. You can see it's a bit more brown there. My pencil could do with a sharpen really, but I might just be able to to make it work without sharpening it. If you keep twisting your pencil round, you get the sharpest point, and it means you don't have to sharpen it quite as often. But if you get to the point where you're really struggling to add detail, I do encourage you to just go ahead and sharpen your pencil. There's no point struggling when you could just make it easier, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. So now that that's nice and sharp, I can get a little bit more detail in here. Get some smaller little marks. It's quite detailed around here. So just build up some little bits of texture. A bit more around here. Some little sideways bits of shading. Might add a little bit more in here. Okay, I don't want to spend too long on that. So let's add a little bit of that ochre colour, the darker yellow. So Dark Naples Ochre 184 is the one that I'm going to use, and I'm just going to blend that into this end bit here to give it that brighter yellow colour. but because it's that ochre, it has that nice, like, almost brown tone to it. Blend it in there a little bit, I think. And then that is that for that colour. I feel like we need a bit of orange in there. If you look closely, there's some little hints of orange throughout this branch. So let's go back to our standard orange colour. The Burnt Ochre 187 is the one that I'm using. And I'm just going to blend a little bit of that in, anywhere I can see some orange tones. It just adds a little bit of variation in the tone, adds something interesting. Branches are never just one colour, there's always little flecks of different colours in there. So I might even add a bit of that in that bit there. Definitely a bit in there. Okay, and then we can always add a bit more if need be. But first, I think we definitely need to darken this up. So let's go back to our dark brown colour, the Burnt Umber, and let's now just start to add a little bit more depth into this branch. Darken it up. So again, I'm just doing little bits of shading, little bits of scribbles and mark making in the direction of the details that I can see on the branch. So I'm going to do some down here. Again, we want to make it look 3D, and to do that we need to start from the edge and work our way in. So starting from that darkest side on the left where the shadows are and working our way in. A little bit of detail just there, it's a little bit darker there. So I'm just going to keep building up a little bit more depth in here. And I'm going to start from this bit up here. Darken that right up. And that little bit there. Do some little bits of texture through the middle. Just some teeny tiny little bits. I'm going to darken up this bit here. Definitely needs to be darker along the top there. Blend in from that left hand side. Again, just sort of alternating the direction of my pencil a little bit so that I can get lots of different marks and bits of shading. I've definitely gone a little bit rogue here. I haven't followed the reference exactly, but as I keep saying, it's not a case of making it exactly like the reference, it's just making it close enough and also making it your own as well. Not fussing too much over all of the little details. Just blend that in a bit. Definitely need to darken up this bit. A little bit there. Gonna blend a little bit in here. A little bit more there. A few more little bits through here. Okay, then let's add our darker brown grey colour, the dark sepia 175, or whatever colour it is that you're using. And let's darken this up even more. This is going to really make this look more realistic and give it some extra dimension. So just going back over everything, looking for the darkest parts and adding a little bit more depth and detail where necessary. So a little bit here. Gonna add some little bits of texture through the middle. It's up to you how far you go with it. I'm just gonna add enough that it makes it look more realistic without spending all day fussing over the details. A little bit here. A little bit down here. It's quite dark around that yellow bit of the exposed branch. Add a little bit around there. Some little bits through the middle. Definitely need to darken up here. A little bit here. And I'm gonna add a little bit more there. Okay, that looks pretty good. I might add a little bit more of the green in, the May green 170, or whatever green it is that you're using. I feel like I could definitely use a little bit more of that in places. And I might add a bit of that dark orange, so the dark cadmium orange 115 for me, or whatever dark orange colour it is that you're using. Just there, I feel like it could do with that extra little bit. Just to add a bit more of a rich colour. Very, very lightly, only a little bit. Doesn't need a lot. Okay, and then let's add some black to darken it all up. So black 199. And I think it won't really need a whole lot more after that. So just focusing this again on the very darkest areas. We don't need to go too crazy. It's mostly along the left-hand side. And a little bit on the right in places. And it's very dark on this bottom bit here, so Got quite a little bit there. Quite a bit here. Definitely need a bit more on the end here. A little bit here. Bit there, and then a little bit on this right hand side, I think. Just here and there. Then I think I might go back in with a little bit of the darker brown colour, so the burnt umber 280. Again, just to smooth it out a little bit in places. And just add a little bit more depth. Okie dokie. Maybe a tiny bit more of the dark grey brown, the dark sepia, if need be. But again, it's totally subjective at this point. You might need more orange, more green. It's totally up to you and how you want yours to look. You don't have to do it exactly the same as me. Okie dokie, and I think I'm going to leave that one there. I really hope you have enjoyed joining me for this drawing session and drawing these little items that I found in the garden with me. Let me know if you'd like to see more tutorials like this. I did collect quite a few different things, so I probably will do a part 2 and share some more of those little studies with you. Feel free to use this as inspiration for creating your own studies from things that you find while out in nature, whether you go on a walk and collect a few little bits or go to the local park. It's totally up to you. You can really have fun with this and apply it to lots of different things. So do make sure to give this video a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to see more videos like this and part 2 of course, and I'll see you in the next one. So have a wonderful day and bye for now.